I would like to remind all parties the call is now being recorded. If you have any objections, to please disconnect at this time. And I would now like to turn the call over to Elizabeth Martinko. Thank you. You may begin.
Great. Thank you, Ilan. Welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series, brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today's webinar is entitled HMIS Data Quality. I am Elizabeth Martinko. I'm your host and your moderator for today's webinar. All of our attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinar with questions and comments. However, all of the participant lines are muted now. We will open them up for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please be aware that you can submit questions at any time during the presentation, however, using the GoToWebinar chat feature. And these questions also will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end. To submit questions via chat, open the GoToWebinar dialog box by clicking on the orange arrow. It usually appears on the right-hand side of your screen, and this will open up a menu of options. If you click inside the questions box, you can type in a question and then click send, and it will come to us. Now I'd like to introduce today's topic and presenters. There's been a lot of interest in the data quality component of the new CWIS rule. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has similar experience with an emphasis on the quality of data and data planning with their Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. Our speakers today are Mike Lindsay, Senior Technical Specialist at ICF International, and Gerry Leslie. Mike has more than 14 years of experience in HMIS and Continuum of Care implementation, and he is currently leading HMIS and Continuum of Care TA engagements in many communities to assist in advancing their Continuum of Care and HMIS implementations. His experience is focused on data quality and monitoring, practical and strategic uses of data warehousing techniques, and supporting and growing regional HMIS collaborations. Prior to joining ICF, Mr. Lindsay worked for the Allegheny County Department of Human Services, ACDHS, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 10 years. While at ACDHS, he was the HMIS and Continuum of Care Administrator, leading the agency to develop a comprehensive cross-system HMIS integration. He directed HMIS data analysis to inform system redesign and guided program development and performance evaluation. Mike will be joined today by Gerry Leslie, the Project Director for the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. And at this time, I'd like to turn things over to Mike.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Lindsay. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm with ICF International, and currently I'm one of HUD's national TA providers, and primarily work in communities to enhance and improve their homeless service delivery system. And a key element of that is the further enhancement of their homeless management information systems. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the homeless management information systems at a high level and what the responsibilities are for communities in collecting and reporting data. We'll talk a little bit about the overview and the HMIS history. And then very specifically for today, myself and my colleague Gerry Leslie from Michigan will talk about specific data quality plan development, and more importantly, after we've seen communities develop their data quality plan, the processes and the protocols that they put in place to monitor that data quality and ultimately enforce and incentivize that data quality. And then towards the end of our session today, Gerry will walk you through a very specific community example where he'll walk through his experience at the state of Michigan in increasing their HMIS participation, ultimately their data quality, and really the use of their data across their system. So thanks Elizabeth, and thanks for everyone for joining the call today. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about the HMIS history and background. You can go ahead and advance the slides, 2 slides, Elizabeth. So we'll start and focus on the HMIS background. So HMIS stands for Homeless Management Information System. And about 10, 15 years ago, communities across the country that receive federal funds to provide and administer homeless services are required and were required at the time to collect and report data on all individuals and families who receive homeless services through their continuum of care. Essentially, a continuum of care is a network of homeless providers in a defined geographic region. These communities are required to collect all information on homeless individuals and families through the use of a homeless management information system. often referred to as an HMIS system. So throughout today's presentation, we'll primarily refer to those systems as being HMIS systems. These HMIS systems are administered at the local or the state level, depending on how the continuum of care has established its geographic boundaries. And they're typically administered by nonprofit organizations or by local or state government entities. All communities that receive federal funds are required by regulation to identify their local system lead agency, their local system administrator, and their specific HMIS software vendor. So communities are required to identify an organization to lead their HMIS, and they're required to go through an RFP process and a process to select a specific HMIS vendor. So when we talk about HMIS, we're referring to a specific organization administering a specific software in a community. There are numerous software providers who provide different HMIS solutions to different communities based on a local contracting process. All of the HMIS systems that support continuum of cares are built off of the same data standards and the same technical standards, but in many communities are provided by different technology firms. HMIS systems primarily collect client-level information and service involvement information for all programs and all clients receiving service in a community. These HMIS systems have grown dramatically over the last 15 to 20 years to include participation by the original federal programs funded by HUD, but also local nonprofit organizations providing philanthropic based homeless services, other federal partners, etc. So over time and through what I would say is the direct result of the data quality and the use of the data in these systems, that participation has expanded beyond your standard and typical federally funded homeless systems. You can go ahead and advance the slide. So when HMIS administration and data collection are accomplished completely, effectively, and efficiently, it can be a very powerful tool in a community to, in our case, prevent and end homelessness. High data quality systems give communities the real ability to understand the demographics and characteristics of homelessness in their local continuum. It gives communities the ability to analyze the transient and fluid nature of homelessness, gives communities the ability to develop unduplicated, complete, and accurate counts of homelessness. Ultimately, our HMIS systems and the community's HMIS systems give the community the high data quality to describe the nature of homelessness both locally, regionally, and ultimately nationally. Most importantly, high data quality and analysis gives communities the ability to evaluate the effectiveness of the homeless response system and to improve the delivery of housing and homeless services towards the ultimate goal of preventing and ending homelessness, all types of homelessness in all communities. You can go ahead and advance the slide. So just to talk a little bit about where HMIS stands currently in our communities. As I previously mentioned, communities began implementing HMIS and data collecting processes somewhere in the range of 2001 to 2005. So it was a standard that came in place and became a requirement in 2001. HUD gave communities a pretty extensive period of time to come into compliance with these requirements and begin to collect data. Currently, data is being used across 450-plus continuum of cares through their HMIS systems to inform the AHAR report to Congress, which is the Annual Homelessness Assessment Report. And this report gives Congress a sense of the nature of homelessness across the country and can really show nationally and locally, how HUD is able to really move the needle on homelessness and effectively, reduce and prevent homelessness in communities. This report includes the universal data elements and also program-specific data elements. So not to speak, too long about those, but essentially our HMIS systems are developed on universal data standards and elements. So any HMIS system implemented in any community has a standard set of data a standard set of questions and data responses that are collected on every individual and family. So although they're administered locally and may use a different vendor, they're all using the same backbone of a platform to be able to do consolidated reporting. The feedback we receive from HUD is that the increases in funding and sometimes the stabilization in funding is really due primarily to the data that our programs and systems are able to produce to give Congress that the information they need to be able to continue to support homeless programs across the country. I talked very quickly at the beginning about the way that HMIS has been able to expand over the past couple years. HMIS has expanded beyond the walls of housing and urban development. We have seen some very critical, key federal partners join the HMIS movement and begin to require participation of their programs in the HMIS systems as well. So it originally began with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We have recently, in the past couple of years, seen the Department of Health and Human Services begin to require their PATH programs, so their the SAMHSA-funded mental health-based street outreach programs are now required to collect their data in the HMIS system as well. We have seen the VA take substantial steps in requiring their homeless-based programs to record their information in HMIS, and we've recently seen the Administration of Children and Families, specifically the Family and Youth Services Bureau under FSBE, require their runaway and homeless youth programs to participate in HMIS. So if you consider where this started, just with the requirements of the federal HUD programs and where it's expanded to now, the breadth of information available to communities and available at the federal level on homelessness has expanded dramatically over the last couple of years. We feel confident and have received direct feedback from HUD and other federal agencies that is primarily due to the quality of the data in the system and the ability for strategic national and local decisions to be made based on the data that's exhibited through these communities. All that to say, around 2005, 2006, 2007, it started to become clear at the national level that just encouraging participation wasn't enough. You can go ahead and move forward, Elizabeth. So around 2006, 2007, there started to be a strong need to start to focus not only on participation in the system, but more so and more importantly on the quality of the data that was being input into the system and the ability for decision makers to use that data. So we're going to talk a little bit about the HMIS data quality plans that started to be developed during this time and how they've positioned communities to be able to better use their data. You can go ahead and move forward. So when we talk about data quality, we're at the federal level and at HUD's level, we're really talking about the reliability and the validity of client-level data collected in the HMIS system. It's measured, we measure it, and communities measure it by the extent to which the client-level data in the system actually reflects what's happening in the real world. If is information that's being collected on an individual or family who's accessing homeless services, is that information, that demographic information, accurate? If or length of stays in programs or demographics about the individuals or families in those programs, is what's showing up in the system actually reflective of what communities are seeing on the ground? With this good data quality, these communities can start to tell the story of homelessness in their community. We've seen a lot of communities be able to expand their homeless services just through the use and ability to show funders, local nonprofit organizations or foundation communities to be able to show the actual data and show how homelessness is being affected in communities, gives them the ability to really have ownership over the homeless system and really start to tell that story. But again, back to the annual homeless assessment report to Congress, the ability to tell the national story of homelessness based on documented and accurate data in the system has really proven strategically beneficial to communities across the country. So when we talk about data quality, we're primarily talking about certain characteristics of data quality, at least from the HMIS and from the HUD perspective. We focus primarily on the timeliness of the data, the completeness of the data, and ultimately the accuracy of the data in the systems. And we'll talk more about these in a moment, and I know Gerry's going to focus specifically on Michigan, on how Michigan has established their data quality plan, but essentially goes back to that often heard and sometimes glossed over concept of garbage in, garbage out. And we really, before we started to focus more nationally on data quality, we started to realize that the data that was in the system couldn't be relied upon in order to make strategic resource allocation decisions or to coordinate services across the community. So for the first 5 years we focused on participation. The next 5 years we focused on nationally on data quality. And now, as you'll hear both Gerry and I talk about, now we're focusing more on the use of that quality data now that communities and HUD have access to that. You can go ahead and move forward. So a couple goals that became apparent for communities as they were starting to think about data quality was the need to have improved data quality, but also a plan on how to benchmark and measure that data quality, or how to set interim goals, was really geared around the goal of needing to provide reliable data for homeless planning. Providing reliable data to assess the client and the client's actual needs and the outcomes of programs. What program types are producing the best outcomes in our community, and ultimately how do we coordinate services across different provider types, different providers in a community to ensure that clients receive holistic and wraparound services in the community. And ultimately, where we're seeing communities get to at this point is the ability to evaluate how efficient their local funds are being used. So the communities took a couple interim steps in the process to increase data quality, and those steps are primarily the establishment of a data quality plan. So again, changing the culture of this is a process I have to go through or my agency has to go through, changing that culture to a culture of an increased need for high data quality to better design services and better allocate resources locally. So it's really a culture change. It was a culture change in the homeless world to make this movement towards data quality. And then ultimately it became clear to most communities that there had to be a monitoring process established and followed in order to make sure that their communities were meeting the data quality standards and taking steps to increase their data quality. You can move forward. So just a couple quick comments about the process of developing a data quality plan. At least in the homeless world, it was a community-level document that facilitates the ability of the community itself to achieve statistically valid and reliable information. It was developed in our communities. It's developed by the HMIS leads, but it has very strong community input. So it's a plan that the community has ownership over, the community sets the goals for and the benchmarks on, and it clearly identifies the roles and responsibilities. What's the responsibility of the HMIS lead? What's the responsibility of the local government entity? And ultimately, the nonprofits providing services and the users of the system. Again, it focuses on timeliness, completeness, and accuracy, and it has to include, an implementation plan and a monitoring process in order to, really affect change in the long run. Can move forward. So once we started to work with and communities started to work to establish these plans, it became pretty clear, and there was a real realization from the field that collecting high quality data on something as unpredictable as homelessness is extremely challenging. In order to have a true impact, the need for data quality and the roadmap to get there needed to be understood widely by the community, not just the leaders, but all the way down to program managers and users. The data quality plan needed to set expectations for good quality data, reliable data, and ultimately needs to increase the understanding that without good quality data, we and other communities will never truly understand the homeless populations in our communities or the needs that they have or the services that need to be provided to move them into permanent housing. Ultimately, a data quality plan itself is a community's first real step in understanding homelessness and strategically designing a system to end all homelessness in communities. You can move forward. So I want to talk quickly and briefly about some of the components of a data quality plan and how how communities are able to start to enforce this change, this incremental change. And I know Gerry's going to get into some specific details, but primarily guidance from HUD, TA providers, and then best practices in communities have really identified, 5 key components to a data quality plan. The first one being timeliness. In most communities, this really equates to the short period of time that programs have available between, the program entry date and the data collection and the data input date. A lot of communities limit that amount of time to 24 hours or 48 hours. We have some communities that extend that out a little bit further. It all depends on resources available to those communities, but essentially timeliness is the first cornerstone and backbone of a good data quality plan. The next component, 2, completeness, is the degree to which all required and relevant data elements are collected, complete, and entered into the system, again, on a timely basis. The accuracy component is the degree to which the data in the system accurately reflects what's happening in the real world. So those are your 3 key components: timeliness, completeness, and accuracy. And once that's been established, it's clear that in order for communities to experience that change and that culture shift, there needs to be a monitoring process in place. And this really gets to and starts to measure the degree to which each program and system is meeting the benchmarks through enforceable agreements. So along the lines of monitoring, communities look for incentives to incentivize their data quality standards in their community, and sometimes they look for enforcement ways. So a lot of communities are starting to tie funding for homeless services directly to the quality of the data in the system for those specific programs. You can move forward. Just a couple other quick points on data quality plans. Each component that I just went over, timeliness, completeness, accuracy, monitoring, incentives, and enforcement, should include the rationale behind its inclusion. So again, those were the key components that made sense to the homeless community. They may be applicable in your programs in your communities, but we'd encourage you to think about what makes the most sense to measure and how to measure it, and ultimately the rationale behind the inclusion of those components, the factors to address the relevant components, what data elements will be measured, how will they be measured, how will increases in data quality be measured, et cetera, and any special issues or exceptions that need to be considered. So, for instance, very quick example, in the homeless world, there are programs that serve highly functional individuals that really just need a leg up to get out of homelessness. There are also programs that serve, chronic street homeless, essentially the individuals or families that live in abandoned buildings or under bridges, bus shelters, etc. So data quality, when looking at those specific program types, looks very different. And being clear that data quality can be measured differently across different programs was something that grew over time, and that awareness and understanding grew over time. But our systems are now to the point where they look at the type of project and the type of clients that are being served in those clients, and are informed of those differences while they set their data quality standards. Once established, it's really important for this to become part of the culture and the nature of homeless services. So users need to be trained and really understand and be educated on the plan. Compliance must be monitored. So it's either monitored in some communities by the HMIS lead. In other communities, it's monitored by a volunteer group of volunteers that work in a community. Some communities charge a local nonprofit with doing the monitoring, but ultimately the process of moving towards higher data quality needs to be monitored and needs to be reported consistently back to the community. Where appropriate, sanctions must be outlined, and where appropriate must be enforced. In the communities that we work in, every community's plan is customized to meet the goals of their community. And I'll say that, and then we could show you, plans from 10 different communities, and there would be a lot of consistency across those plans due to the nature of the services. But it is the responsibility of each community, led by their HMIS lead, to establish the plans, the process, the monitoring process, and ultimately the incentivized process to meet those goals. You can go ahead and move forward. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the process of HMIS data quality monitoring and how that has evolved since the data quality plans were established somewhere between 5, 7, 10 years ago. Go ahead and move forward, Elizabeth. So data quality monitoring in the homeless systems is an ongoing process with very defined and consistent procedures for analyzing and reporting on the reliability and validity of systems data. The monitoring process is the primary and frequently applied process for generating areas for data quality improvement and consistent review. This process specifically should identify what the expected data quality goals are, steps to meet and measure progress in meeting the data quality goals, and the specific roles and responsibilities for ensuring data quality is of the highest value in a community. Ultimately, through the monitoring process, when data quality benchmarks are met, a community will be better positioned to make informed and data-driven decisions. So we've seen a lot of communities establish plans and establish monitoring processes, but not clearly define whose responsibilities in the field it was to ensure that data quality was being met at the programmatic level. So we really see these community processes being driven by the HMIS leads, but having strong community involvement, executive directors, program manager level involvement, and have that trickle all the way down to the users who are ultimately using the system to make sure that it's in the requirements are enforced from top to bottom, but also that the users of the system, who are often the front line case managers, homeless case managers, really understand the value and the impact that the quality of data has on their system. You can go ahead and move forward. So a couple other points to consider when you're thinking about a data quality monitoring plan. Your plan should establish benchmarks and goals. Very clearly establish what your data quality is now, what your community or community or a high level system, what your data quality thresholds look like today, what your ultimate goals look like, and how you define those interim goals. It took our programs years to thoroughly and fully across the country bring their data quality up. It's pretty critical to keep the process moving, to set small incremental goals in order to meet that ultimate goal in the long run. It was pretty clear through our work and local work that it's important to define from the start who's responsible for this process, and to be very clear on the roles and responsibilities of the HMIS leads, the continuum of care decision-making bodies, program directors, and like I mentioned, ultimately the folks on the ground providing the services. But who can enforce this? So it's one thing for our communities to establish these goals, but there needs to be a body and a way to enforce these requirements. And in a lot of communities, that's being done through the strategic resource allocation. So data quality has become, a review and ranking criteria in most communities for continued federal funds, continued federal funds, or ultimately the increase of federal funds in a community or within a specific provider. And ultimately, assistance has to be made available. So if there are programs or agencies who are struggling bringing their data quality up, they have to know where to go to get technical assistance, and to have that technical assistance and training, be readily available to folks in the field.
The remaining 3 bullets for this slide on establishing a data quality monitoring plan are as follows: establish timelines for improvement and compliance, calculate compliance rates, and establish timeframes for data quality reports.
You can go ahead and move forward. So around data quality, additional monitoring considerations, and what we're starting to see in the field as, I guess, what we would call, best practices. What's working in communities, and what is, where are we drawing that line in between communities that have, strong data quality standards, monitoring processes in place that are really affecting change on a consistent basis with the quality of data in their system. And in those communities that are making the biggest strides in this direction, we're seeing a process where all stakeholders are very clear on the roles and responsibilities, and that although data quality is very secondary in nature to homeless services, it's clear in these communities from the top down that the quality of data is directly related and proportional to the continued support of federal funding, and in a lot of communities, the increased support of federal funding. Our communities go through a competitive process every year. At the national level, that competitive process is being more informed by data quality, and ultimately decisions are being made to reallocate money from underperforming communities with low data quality into other communities with higher data quality and better outcomes. Having that be an understanding from the ground up in communities really incentivizes the end users to understand and appreciate the value of data, and the reality that the better value of data, the potential more services that could be available, through their programs in the community. We see these communities making data quality a standing meeting agenda item. So in the continuum of care world, there are COC-based meetings where all stakeholders involved in homeless services convene on a quarterly basis to discuss and look at homelessness in their community. These communities that are making strides in the right direction are making data quality a consistent and standing agenda item. They're measuring success of their homeless systems through placements in permanent housing, equivalent to measuring the success of their system based on the increased data quality in their homeless systems as well. Ensuring that, and we consistently recommend this, that ensuring data quality is monitored and compliance is achieved before any project level or system level data is published. And I think we have learned collectively our lesson in the long run that in the early stages of HMIS, data was published in a lot of communities before that data quality could be certified. So, as you can imagine, local elected officials see data that tells them one thing about homelessness, and they have a reaction to it. The feds see something about homelessness, and they have a reaction to it. If that data isn't of the highest quality, then those reactions aren't in line with what's actually happening in those communities. So we strongly encourage you to, ensure compliance and be able to verify data quality before any data is publicized. And ultimately, our communities are now moving to a place where they're using data quality to measure system and program performance. So the quality, with the increased quality of data, communities are now able to look at their system as a whole, and what ends up being a system at the national level, being able to look and see, what types of interactions are producing the best outcomes for homelessness, for homeless clients, what types of services are needed to move folks into permanent housing. This quality of data this high quality of data gives communities the ability to make those types of strategic decisions. Go ahead. And just real quickly before we go ahead and move on to our community example, a couple common data quality pitfalls that we just want to point out. These are lessons learned that we've seen a lot of communities feel their way through over time. You can go ahead and move forward. The first one, and I think we just alluded to this on the last slide, is ignoring data quality until the reports are due or the data is published. Data quality really needs to be a consistent process done in our programs at the HMIS lead level and then at the program level. Data quality is something that our communities need to pay attention to on a consistent basis to make sure at the time of the annual homeless assessment report, at the time that their local or state reports are due, the quality of that data has already been verified and those reports can be run and there can be confidence in those reports. We've seen a lot of communities collect data for a handful of years, produce reports, only to be relatively disappointed in the outcomes that are exhibited through their data systems and their reports versus the outcomes that they know existed on the grounds in their community. Again, and I think I've touched on this throughout the session, emphasizing data quality for some staff and not others. To really affect this type of change and to see this type of change, it was clear to us that this needed to be something that trickled down from the decision-making bodies in communities through the programs administering the funds down to the users actually collecting the data from individuals and families in their community, making sure that there's ownership for that process from top to bottom and that the outcomes of higher data quality is understood throughout the data collection and reporting processes and responsibilities. So failing to keep agency management informed, as critical as it is to keep end users understanding the need to collect high level data quality and to input that into a system in a timely manner, it's equally as important to make sure that the management of those organizations understand how their data quality is being reviewed, how the data quality affects their funding and or the outcomes of their programs in order to see that change trickle down through a community. And I think the last one is not taking advantage of the potential the potential of quality data in a system. I think when we saw our communities get to a point where they had high data quality, we wanted to work with them and encourage them to publish that data, to show the results of their homeless system. For too many years, it become pretty common to collect a lot of information in your HMIS systems and then let it sit for a handful of years and really not to produce any reliable reports back to the community or back to HUD. And I think when we saw communities get to a point where they had confidence in their data and they were confident that their data exhibited the high level of work their community was putting into ending homelessness, that data, needs to get out to the community so that folks understand, the effect that these services are having on their community. You can go ahead and move forward. So at this point, I am going to pass it over to Gerry Leslie, and Gerry is going to talk about, data quality plans and monitoring, at the local level or at the state level in Michigan, and share a on-the-ground experience with folks on the call today.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Mike, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide. But before we actually jump into the portion of the presentation I prepared, I had a couple of thoughts that jumped into my head as Mike was making his presentation that I think are really important before I begin this portion of the presentation to really preface with these remarks. The first remark is that one thing that we all have to realize is that data quality is not the end goal. Data quality is the means to reaching the end goal. There's a lot that happens within projects that we work with that we think of, okay, we're getting to a certain point data quality, that's what we're aiming for. The reality of it is what we really are doing here is we are here to provide accurate, actionable information to drive a data-driven decision-making process to help us understand what interventions, what resources, what are the needs of the people that we are serving, and how to best address those needs. So at the end of the day, we are here to create an environment that can drive data-driven decision-making. Again, the information we present is a means to get there. The information itself is not the end goal that we're aiming for. The second thing that often ends up happening within data systems, and I come from a background actually in information technology, so we're probably the ones that are most guilty of this. We realize that these projects, we kind of pigeonhole data collection projects thinking that they're just technical or they're IT projects, when the reality of it is what we're here to do is we are a measurement project. Anybody who works with data systems around any form of social services, health and human services, we are here to provide something that leads to improvement in how we provide services. So we have to really break ourselves away of thinking that, okay, we are a reporting tool designed to give information to funders. We're a technical tool to thinking it from the perspective of we are here to have information that is actionable so that we can improve how we offer services, so that we can, obviously, whatever the end goals we have in our world would be preventing and ending homelessness, this information can begin to drive us in that direction. So with that said, I want to touch on a few pieces of general history. As Mike said, HMIS began in the early 2000s under a congressional mandate. We actually, in Michigan, our HMIS project began here in 2003 and 2004. By 2011, all the COCs in the state of Michigan had joined the Michigan State HMIS Project. So again, continuums of care are divisions within the state of Michigan, basically based on community or geographic boundaries. We have 21 of them in the state of Michigan. We have a balance of state which encompasses most of our very rural communities, as well as 20 other mid-sized, small, mid-sized to large-sized communities. And we actually run the project as what I would call a coalition or confederation. So the way to think about it is this. Each of the COCs receives direct funding from HUD, so they receive money themselves coming directly down from HUD, as well as certain state funding that comes from various state agencies across the state. As such, each of those COCs have reporting obligations and actually performance obligations that they work with within their own communities and their own jurisdictions. So what we do is we really consolidate the entire state. We have a series of foundational principles that we all work on together, but at the same time, we work in such a way that each community has their own ability to uniquely make decisions based upon what is in the best interest of the community, what is the service delivery system within that community, how and where services are delivered to make sure that they have the most effective tool they can to work with preventing and ending homelessness. Next slide. So here's a couple things that are really important for to say. Number one, data completeness and data quality plans. This is from our experience. It really requires local ownership of the process to be successful. So in our experience, it is very difficult to run a top-down process of pushing data quality. From my perspective, as a state agency or state nonprofit, which is basically an extension of the state agency, as a project director, it's very difficult for me to push that down the chain and make it successful. There really has to be buy-in at the local community level and complete investment at the local community level to make a good data quality plan useful and worthwhile. The second thing is end users are the critical ones who interact with clients. So from a state perspective, as a project director and my staff who support the statewide implementation, we're not the ones meeting with clients on an everyday basis. We don't know the unique challenges of what is going on in the local community. At the end of the day, it is the end users, which are the case managers, the case workers, the frontline staff, who are the ones interacting with the clients. And at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones who are going to be the critical links in the cog to make sure that we're collecting accurate information. And the third thing about this is to ensure data quality is good. One of the things we determined very quickly is there's no way we can monitor effective data quality from the top of the tree and push it down. It really has to be a local grassroots effort where end users and their supervisors, we call those agency administrators within our system, they're the ones running reports because they're the ones that see the clients, they're the ones that have relationships with the clients. They need to be the ones who are doing the key data quality and data monitoring to make sure that the information that is going in the system is accurate to the clients that they're seeing on a daily basis. So next slide.
A chart is displayed showing Michigan's hierarchy for the project, with levels moving from top to bottom, indicating state staff, system administrator, agency administrator, and end user.
So what I want to do is I want to break this down a little bit for you so you understand what we're dealing with here. First of all, within the HMIS world, we are actually, as far as our data set goes, we are one of the largest HMIS implementations in the country. I have approximately 1,600 users on my statewide system. We have approximately, and you look at this, and I'll explain the system administrator, we have approximately 27, 28 system administrators across the state of Michigan. I have a staff within my state office of about 9 staff working with our statewide project. Because of the scale and the scope of it, obviously there has to be a tremendous amount of investment at all levels to make this successful. So first of all, what ends up happening is from a statewide perspective, again, we have a statewide organization which maintains the core, the foundational functionality of the system. But each community has what we would call basically a project lead in each of the COCs. And the example I have here are 2 major communities in Michigan, Detroit and Grand Rapids. They each have one or more what we call system administrators who are really the key technical linchpins from the system perspective to making sure that the work of the community is consolidated and coordinated. Some places try to do this from the top of the tree, from the statewide office. Our experience shows that it doesn't necessarily work the best that way, that you really need that local involvement. So we have staffed in all the various COCs, those individual system administrators, which are responsible for really overseeing the efforts that happen locally. From then, each of the agencies that participate on the system also have agency administrators. They're basically supervisors of the project at the local agency level that are invested in supervising the data entry and the data completeness that takes place at the agency level, and then it obviously filters down to the end user level, who, for the most part, are actually the ones putting the information into any form of data system. Next slide. So talking about our data quality plan, a couple things I said. Again, we're very what we call a decentralized model. We're a coalition. We also, again, as I said, each community has unique ways in which they operate that are unique to the way services are delivered and unique to the populations they serve. So taking that into consideration, we really had to think long and hard as we began to roll out data quality plan on how this is going to work best. So what we did is we knew at a statewide level for everybody participating, we had to have, and I'm going to use the term baseline or benchmark, it is basically a minimum level of standards in which everybody in the state agrees to abide by as being part of the process. So from our standpoint, we have written up a baseline policies and procedures document which outlines what everybody who is part of the Michigan project abides by. And in that policies and procedures, we have a data quality plan implemented within it. And what that is essentially, as it says below in the second point, it is a baseline or minimum standard. What happens is local communities are given the option, and we actually encourage this very strongly, that local communities take that baseline and minimum standard and they build off it, that they build more stringent or more detailed data quality plans. They can go ahead and take that and, because of their own community needs, add some specific additions to their own plans, and then make that so that they can implement it locally. The rule of thumb that we always use within our project is you can always go more stringent with policies and procedures and data quality. You just cannot go less stringent than that baseline plan that ties everybody together. The other thing we do is we update our data quality plan annually, It is usually in September and early October. We have changes. Mike mentioned universal data elements or series of standardized federal data standards that we all follow. We typically have those new standards go into effect every year on October 1st, and our plan is updated usually within the month or two before those go into effect to take into account any changes in those standards and make sure that our data quality plan is still compliant with that. Next slide. So the question is, how do we as a project from an HMIS perspective just practically address the data quality plan components? And if we go to the next slide here, Mike already outlined many of these in the presentation just before this, but a couple things that we do want to highlight. Number one, beyond a written plan, here's the thing: communities must also have strategies for making the plan successful. So you have something in writing. One of the jokes that many of us have within this world is the best plans are actually become paperweights on your bookshelf because they're never opened and actually used. The reality of it is a good data quality plan cannot be a paperweight on your shelf. It has to be something that is living and active in the work you do. And for that, beyond just coming up with a series of standards that are part of the data quality plan, you have to come and work with your agencies and work with your participants to make sure you have strategies for implementing the various elements of that plan. So these strategies include processes, so obviously processes for how you're going to implement that, what resources you have available to implement that plan, and then what technical assistance you may need from various parties involved in the project to make sure you're getting the best data quality into the system. And here's the key thing. This is a hallmark of something that we refer to as continuous quality improvement, or QI, or quality improvement. You must have complete buy-in of leadership within an agency and within a community leadership structure in order for a plan to be successful. If you have buy-in at a local level from, let's say, an agency standpoint or end user, they want to work towards that, but you do not have buy-in from leadership, it is very difficult to make any plan successful. So you have to honestly have buy-in completely from the top level, from community leadership all the way down to the bottom level to the end users who are actually seeing clients and interacting with clients to make any data quality plan successful. Next slide. So Mike highlighted 5 key areas in his discussion above, and I'm actually going to go through and give you practical examples of how we worked with each of these 5 areas and how this looked in a practical illustration of how we implement a plan around these.
The 5 data quality plan components are: Component 1, timeliness; Component 2, completeness; Component 3, accuracy; Component 4, monitoring; and Component 5, incentives and enforcement.
So if we go to the next slide, we're going to take a look at timeliness. So first of all, again, as I said, we in Michigan came up with a benchmark. And what the benchmark was they called for all information to be entered into our HMIS system at latest within 15 days of client interaction. So when an agency met with a client, within 15 days at the very latest, that information would be within the HMIS system. Now, again, I said this is a benchmark, and the reality of it, and this is a fortunate thing, most of our agencies have much more stringent requirements on this. The reality is we encourage agencies to enter data in real time to ensure that that information is getting there as quickly and efficiently as possible. So here's a great example of where processes, there was often some pushback and some challenges. One of the things that we would hear as questions and concerns from case managers quite often would be, when I'm putting information into a computer, typing it in, it doesn't feel like I'm connected with my client and actually building that rapport, because I feel like I'm more focused on my technology than I am on my client, which many of us in our technical world know today when we have communications. If any of you have kids, they're staring at their iPhones all the time. When you're trying to have a conversation, you can know that that's a justifiable concern. One of the things that we really did was we began to pull in some people who could train individuals on how to create meaningful and interactive case sessions with clients while still having that technology available to enter that information into the system, so we could address that concern that the case managers had, which is completely legitimate. but then at the same time also, again, maximize the efficiency of getting information into the system as quickly as possible, with the best way being real time, because doing real-time data entry is the best and most efficient way to use resources. The other thing, I talked about this just a couple slides ago, is we also look for what are some of the technology or technical solutions that we can do to really enhance this. So a couple things we looked at really quickly were, again, laptop and desktop computers. Many of our agencies did not have the computing hardware necessary to get that information in real time. So we found some agencies which were underfunded. We looked for ways that we could pull in resources to get them the technology so that information was going in as quickly as possible. Also within the homeless service world, as many people may realize, that many of the clients that we see are going to be not in places where you're going to be sitting in an office in a social services building. Programs that are doing the most effective work around homelessness do something called outreach. They get out in the streets. They're in libraries. They're in restaurants. They're in places where homeless individuals tend to congregate, and oftentimes what that means is they're going to need some form of technology to collect that information when meeting with clients. So we really began to work with these programs, doing some forward-thinking work of how can we get laptops in the hands of these caseworkers who are in the field, these outreach workers. And even better, how can we get tablet devices in the hands of these outreach workers that have connections to an always-on internet connection? So they may be sitting in the middle of a park somewhere talking to a client, but they can collect that information and get that on the system. So when the client interaction has wrapped up, they're going to have the information they need. Also, within our large volume agencies that are collecting massive amounts of data on a large number of clients, say like large number of services at once, we have some agencies like this in our biggest communities. We looked into using scanning hardware, and we have ID scan cards which are used, which can quickly enter services within the system. These ID cards were actually something that were so valuable that we have worked, and this is one of the big wins of our project, big successes of our project. We have been able to work with the Michigan Department of Secretary of State, where they will accept those cards that we do in the system, which have photos on them, as legitimate forms of photo ID, and going ahead and trying to help our clients get some form of state-issued ID, which is a need that many of our clients have. So that in and of itself was a huge win, even outside of the data entry component of the project. The next slide. So component 2 is data completeness. So again, all agencies that participate on the system, whether or not they receive some type of federal or state funding or not, they're required to enter at least the baseline, what we call the universal data elements, into the system as part of participating. Now, we do have many agencies which are participating that do not receive any form of direct funding to participate. We're fortunate to have many, we call them faith-based shelters, which are emergency shelters. Other times they're called by the name of rescue missions in the system that are entering data and helping us understand homelessness. The baseline we ask for them to do is collect that base amount of information on individuals to help us understand better who is being served. And additional requirements are going to be based on program guidelines. Now, one of the things that we do have is we have what we call recommended system flags, which show up to remind users if they've not entered in certain of these required elements. So at the end of it, if there are certain elements that have not been entered in, it will flag the user and say that these elements have not been entered. Do you want to continue? And they would have to click yes if they want to continue and save that information without entering those required elements. So this flag is just a reminder. Users are not required to answer those questions. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment because this is a very important element. And the third point, unfortunately, was left over from my previous slide, so it is actually not relevant to this specific slide. So let's go to the next slide here. So data accuracy, and I have a quote up here that says, the only thing worse than no data is bad data. So I mentioned before that we have flags there to flag individuals if they do not enter in the required elements. Some data systems actually have the ability to require, if there are required elements, to make all users fill those pieces of information out before they can exit the screen so that they feel that that is a good way to ensure data quality. Within our experience, we actually found out that the opposite ended up happening, and what happened is if say, for instance, a end user did not collect information and that information was required for them to get to the next screen, what they would do is they would actually go and enter in bad or incorrect data on that client to get themselves out of that screen, get themselves past that required question. So if there was something about, let's say, client income, for example, it was a required element, they would go ahead and select a response which may not be accurate in order to get past that screen. So at the end of the day, we had to make a decision that it is probably much better to have holes in our data quality than to have bad data, because it will give us an inaccurate picture of what we are serving and some of the needs that we have with our clients. So a couple other things that we do, and this is actually part of our data quality and data completeness plan. First of all, within the policies and procedures, we include processes to ensure that data is accurate as much as possible. So, for instance, with the client name, one of the things that we have is we have the client, number one, if they do have an ID, present a legal ID, whether it be a birth certificate, a driver's license, or a state ID card. And then we enter the information as is registered on a formal document into the system. If, of course, the client does not have that information, we will ask the question, please give us your name as it is with a legal document, such as your birth certificate, and so we record that information that way. We also consistently train and retrain on particularly difficult or nuanced definition elements. Within our world in homelessness, we have two things that are very nuanced. The homeless definition itself has a bunch of nuances to it, and even more nuanced is a condition called chronically homeless, which it has a definition of its own. In order to make sure we're collecting as accurate as information as possible, we continuously retrain users on these definitions. And it's even gone as far as with the chronically homeless definition, we really encourage people or agencies to take case managers who are most versed in the definition and have them actually conduct what we call a housing history interview around that chronic homeless definition, so we make sure we're getting accurate information, not guess information on that. The other thing we do is we work with providers to implement what we call what-if procedures. So here's a great example that there are certain situations where data quality and data completeness aren't necessarily due to a breakdown in the staff at an agency, but it's actually due to some condition within the service delivery environment or client behavior which causes issues. A great example of this is in our world in homeless services. We have emergency shelters where many times clients will come into the shelter to see services, and then they may leave after staying there for a night and go away, and they never come back. And one of the things that we have as a key data element is what happens to the client, where do they go after they leave the program. If you, of course, are in constant communication with the client and they keep coming back, you can probably get that a little bit better. If a client completely disappears out of the blue, you're going to have a lot of problems with that, and that's a legitimate concern agencies have. So what we do is we train within the intake procedures to say, hey, if you as a client, you go somewhere tomorrow, you don't come back to our agency, for example, what is the way that we can get in touch with maybe you or a family member? And we say, hey, we're not trying to track you, to follow you down, to really hunt for you, in this case from a stalking perspective. We just really care about you as a client. We want to make sure that you're okay. We don't need to know the specifics of where you are. We just need to know generally where you've gone to as the next stop within your journey. And by having that information that case managers can do as a follow-up in case clients leave the program without telling where they're going, it allows them to actually increase the completeness element, the accuracy element of the clients who exit programs, and helps that area of the data quality perspective to improve. Next slide. So component 4. One of the things that we believe and one of the things that we preach within the culture of our project is that data is democratic. What that means is running data reports, looking at outcomes, looking at how your program is performing. That is not something that you do only from the top of the project. It's not something you do only from a statewide level. It is something we want everybody in the system to be able to do. We want our agencies, that are individual agencies in the project, to be able to look at their data and use it for advocacy work and use it to evaluate performance. We want our communities to be able to do the same. So we have a complete suite of data reports that are available, and all users, all communities, all agencies can run those across the spectrum of the project. We have them set up so that whether it's being run at the top from a statewide perspective or at the bottom from an agency perspective, those reports can give whoever's running them actionable intelligence information to help drive decision making. Also, as part of that process, we encourage all projects and agencies to regularly run data quality reports. So programs that have low volume, those that have little client turnover, very small number of clients, they should typically run the reports at least once a month as our recommended protocol. Higher volume projects, as we talked about earlier, emergency shelter projects, which can see hundreds of clients each day, we want them to run reports weekly or biweekly. Some of them even run data quality reports every couple days, depending on their scope, to make sure that they can get on top of any data quality issues before they become major issues. The key of consistency and frequency of running reports is this. If you get past a long period of time and you haven't been monitoring your data quality, problems compound and it becomes much more difficult to clean that data up. If you're consistently on top of monitoring your data quality, it makes it much easier for you to correct errors before they become big issues. And as Mike mentioned on the third point down here, we have our system administrators who are the community leads at the local level. We actually have them make data quality and outcomes a standing agenda item in their local agency administrator and user meetings within their communities, as we do from a statewide perspective with all of our system administrators. And the fourth point is a very key one. One of the things that we found is the best way to help improve data quality is to actually publish very frequently reports on the state of homelessness and reports on what is happening, what outcomes look like. Because when places begin to see reports and they begin to see that their information is being used for actual advocacy purposes, to be able to advocate for increased funding, to be able to advocate for more resources in critical areas of unmet need, it's going to really drive from our experiences agencies and communities to be much more intentional about making sure the data is as complete as possible. If all they see that information is being used for is reporting to funders, they see very little data or value within the data they're doing. If they see that that information actually has significant value in advocating for the work they're doing, it really drives forward that emphasis that what we're doing is important. We need to make sure it's as accurate as possible. Next slide, component 5. Or component 4, we're still on component 4. We also empower communities and provide technical assistance to them with help in publishing data. So again, circling back around to this, what we do is when we actually come up with reports and we use them from a statewide level, we actually teach communities how to take those reports as templates and use them so that they can publish their own information to advocate for local resources and to advocate to stakeholders in their local community for continued awareness around homeless work and advocacy. And actually, as I mentioned before, when done right, publication includes the built-in monitoring component, which takes place before you actually do the publication, which is what Mike referenced. You want to make sure that you have a committee, a group of people that is going through and vetting this data before it's published to make sure it's accurate, so you're not going to be putting out information in front of key stakeholders that is incorrect, that you ultimately may have to backtrack on later because of the fact that you rushed it to publication before you actually completely vetted it. And as one of the components of this, we use continuous quality improvement as a tool to ensure high performance within agencies and within local communities. Again, CQI to be very efficient, to be effective, needs to have ownership from all levels of the community, from frontline staff to leadership within the community. But when done right, it leads to dramatic improvements within data quality and completeness. Next slide, which will be component 5. So incentives and enforcement, this is an area that I do want to touch on a little bit because this is really a very delicate balancing act for lead agencies. So from our perspective as a statewide HMIS lead, as project lead, we often get pressure from various places to be also the enforcement arm of data quality and completeness. Many HMIS projects across the country have taken on that role, that they become the ones that really enforce data quality, data completeness. To be honest with you, in one sense, there is some of that role in what we do, but there's also, I'm very hesitant on doing that. And this is really the key thing from my experience, which has shown where that can ultimately backfire. So from my agency standpoint, if I am viewed as, if you will, that bad cop or the enforcer around data quality, what it does is it makes, let's say, agency staff or end users hesitant to talk to me if they have problems. And most of you know that if you have a staff member who does not talk to you, if you have somebody who's not talking to you about problems until they become big problems, it really becomes much harder to intervene and actually do something to nip that process off before it becomes a major issue. What I want to do as a project director is encourage agencies and users to come to me and be honest about the problems they have without worrying about me, again, taking up the task for it. If there is an issue, I want them to be able to bring that issue to me so that we can problem solve, come up with ways to resolve it before it becomes a big issue. If I'm viewed as a cop, it is often a very difficult thing for them to call me. They're very hesitant because they're afraid of how I may react to them or if there's going to be anything punitive happening to them because so the important thing for real improvement to take place is, here's the deal, not improvement for the sake of staying out of trouble. So at the end of the day, if agencies are constantly worried about somebody walking around with a big stick and beating them over the head with it, they're going to be, again, like soldiers in the trench, they're keeping their heads down below the top. They're not necessarily going to be motivated to really step up when they have problems to help address those and deal with those. So from our role at MICA as a state organization, we provide technical assistance for this. We help the providers who are struggling to improve their internal processes and practices around data quality, data completeness, around workflow. We also encourage open and honest dialogue between our staff and agencies so we can develop real solutions to real problems. So what I do for my staff, I really encourage them to be active with system administrators, to be going out and meeting agencies, to really be putting your foot forward as we are here to help you be the best you can at what you're doing in service delivery. We are not here to be a cop to evaluate you. Obviously, there is a component of that, but we want to see you shine. We want to see you succeed. What that does is creating that culture is it makes people much more open to the work that we're offering and helps us be much better as being problem solvers and being viewed as problem solvers when we come into those situations. We also partner with the funders to assist agencies that are identified as needing assistance. So if one of the funders say that they have an agency that they're really concerned about, one of the things that the funder does is they can call us and they know that they can send us in there. We're not going to come in with a stick. We're going to come in with more of the attitude of, we know there's an issue here. Let's look at what we can partner together with you to do to help you walk through this process and to improve it. Next slide. So what happens in local communities, as Mike said, many of local communities have tied data completeness, and now we in the homeless world have gone to the next step. We're beginning to look at outcomes to determine who gets funding. So to be honest with you, those become the natural, if you will, the stick, if you will, to program evaluation to encourage people to be as accurate as possible with the data plans, but then also make sure that they have processes that are as tight as possible, procedures that work in the process of getting the information in place. So nearly all the tools we have take into account data completeness and accuracy from a local community perspective as a metric within this process. Obviously, high-performing agencies are often the ones offering bonus projects when funding is available. And so when funding is reduced, it's often agencies whose projects do not align with the funder priorities or low-performing agencies who are often the ones that experience cuts. One thing that's critical to mention here is this isn't a situation where everybody's measured against the same benchmark, because if you're serving a very hard-to-serve population, let's say your outcomes may be much lower than those of a much easier-to-serve population. So you have to evaluate projects based upon similar benchmarks of the populations they're serving. You, again, can't look at families who are homeless because of a one-time event that was a crisis and compare their outcomes with somebody who's chronically homeless with a mental health or a substance use condition, because you're really looking at two completely different populations that have two completely different sets of outcomes as benchmarks. We also encourage our system administrators to be resources to assist all of their projects in improving their performance. on a regular basis. So again, the system administrators to be engaged with their agencies and working closely with them. Next slide. So how has this worked with MICA? Well, to be honest with you, it has worked very well. Within the past year, we have achieved what we term to be particularly high rates of performance within data completeness. So around those universal data elements, which we've mentioned earlier, we have achieved a 1 to 2% at the highest rating of missing or unknown, which are well above the HUD benchmarks that they've set forward. Our data quality, our data completeness is at the highest it's ever been, and it has been something that has really been due to this integrated approach of partnering with a grassroots level through a community level to make sure that data completeness and quality is a priority. So, secondly, our data is frequently requested for national research projects due to the depth of our data set, the reliability and accuracy of our data, and the completeness of the data that we're working with. We are actually part of about 3 or 4 major national research projects right now around homelessness because of the quality of our data, and it is used to inform stakeholders from a federal all the way down to a state and local level all over the country because of the work that we're doing. And then the third thing is our data is used heavily to advocate for additional resources to address any homelessness. 2 products that have come out of this is we have something called our Housing Assessment and Resource Agency model, which is something that many places in the country are beginning to adopt right now. We in the state of Michigan have had, we call it coordinated access. We've had it in place within our state for 3 years across the entire state of Michigan. So we are well ahead of the curve on that. And we're also in the middle of a veterans initiative to end veteran homelessness within the next year here in the state of Michigan, which is something that many communities are doing as well across the country. We are looking at it from a complete statewide perspective that we want to end homelessness for veterans by the year 2017, and we are using the data that we have in the system as the driving force to monitor that. So next slide. So I will turn it back over, I believe, to Elizabeth and Mike. I believe we're going to have some question and answer here.
Yes, we are. Wow, thank you both so much. That was a lot of fantastic information. And I've just been watching questions sort of tumble in through our chat box. So, Ilan, if you could let people know how to line up on the phone for questions, and then maybe while they're doing that, we can go ahead and take some of the ones from the chat box.
Thank you. On the audio portion, to ask a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Once again, on the audio portion, please press *1.
Elizabeth takes over as presenter.
Okay. So the first question that I have come in is that high caseloads can be a problem in child welfare. Is that an issue with your program? And if so, how do you work with that and still assure quality data? That's a great question.
Gerry replies.
That is a really good question, and very much so. We do have high caseloads in a lot of what we do. So particularly like in emergency shelter situations, we can have some extremely high caseloads. We've got agencies that have, in some cases, 400 clients go through their agency every day. One of the things that we really encourage, again, it really comes down to efficiencies within processes. So what you do is you look at, again, how do you get that data in the system as efficiently as possible? Real time has been one of the ways that we've dealt with that. The second thing is we look, again, for solutions around entering data if we're dealing with large volumes of clients at the same time. We did, of course, the scan card solution is one way to do that. But I think that it really comes down to, as an agency, really taking a look at your processes in which you see clients and how those processes can best be streamlined to make sure that you're maximizing the time you have with the client, but then obviously minimizing the amount of time that your staff are spending on the data entry end of things.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Where can we find some of the example reports that you mentioned? And also, can you make available a copy of your data quality plan?
We absolutely can. If there is, I don't know the best way to do this. Maybe you all can help us out, but we have our stock data quality plan on our website, and if people can give me an idea of what they're looking for reports, like data quality reports, I can come up with some sample data quality reports they can take a look at to see how we look at that and monitor it.
Okay, perfect. I think if you can send them to me, we can send them out to participants in the email today. And for those of you who are looking for sample reports, if you can either type in the chat box or if you want to push *1 to line up on the phone and let us know maybe what kinds of examples you're looking for, we'll send things out that will best meet your needs.
Hi, Elizabeth. This is Mike. I just wanted to add to that on the HUD Exchange, which is the HUD Homelessness Data Exchange. There is a toolkit available called it's an HMIS data quality toolkit, and it specifically walks through the steps and the requirements to establish a data quality plan and a monitoring process. Certainly encourage folks to take a look at that, and I can send you a link on that as well, Elizabeth. And it'll really, looking at Gerry's plan is a great first step. And then there's also, a process and a tool that you can go through to help to establish your plans.
Okay. And would that also have I think you said it has a template for a data quality plan?
It has a template in it for a data quality plan and outlines the process and the consideration. And I think looking at that through a real world, and looking at a real world example like Michigan, I think is a great opportunity for folks.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, if you could send me that link as well, we'll send that out to folks, and they can have a look at the HMIS exchange and look there for some more resources. Thank you. So somebody else asking for examples of data quality plans, but related to that, are you asking vendors to program reports that conform to the local state data quality plans?
Gerry replies.
Okay, so the vendor is asking them to program it. One of the things we do, this is really important culturally in what we do, we have a reporting tool that can be used and it can be programmed not only by the vendor itself, but programmed by not end users, but key system programming report experts. One of the things that we do, number one, HUD has a series of required reports that they have programming specs on. Those, of course, the vendor puts in. When we program reports from my staff end of things, we actually program reports that can be run anywhere from a statewide level all the way down to a local level. So that what happens is those reports, one report can be made which has value all the way up and down the system. Data quality can be used all the way up and down the system at all levels. Demographics, analytics, they can be used all the way up and down the system. We do that very specifically to maximize values on reporting, to make sure that what we're putting out as a product has benefits for all users and not just a specific subset on the system.
Mike replies.
So at the national level and across vendors, through community work and through direct TA work and specifications being made available through HUD, vendors do understand the basic parameters of data quality and what communities are interested in measuring. So all of the major vendors available to communities have a standard data quality report that can be run and utilized in their specific communities, which I think, in most cases aligns with their local data quality plan. And then if there's a need for customization, it really, trickles down to the community level. But as a whole, the vendors are developing canned reports that can be used across the community.
Okay, wonderful. Elon, do we have anyone on the phone?
I'm showing no questions at this time. As a reminder, to ask a question, press *1.
Okay, we still have plenty in our chat box. I just didn't want to miss anybody who might be on the phone. Let me see, do you have to train on data quality aspects and definitions like reliability and validity, or do you think the HMIS users already understand those underpinnings and those?
Gerry replies.
Oh, heavens. You absolutely have to train. Here's the thing. The key of consistent, reliable, and accurate data is all around training. Training is always going to be the key of everything. Particularly in our world, as I anticipate in your world, this is the case. You often have very nuanced definitions which require a degree of analytic skill to get the data in correctly. One of the things we do is we come up with very detailed trainings around that. And in some cases, it's even got to the point where I mentioned earlier, well, what we do is we really, for some of the very intense interviews, we really encourage agencies to highlight one or two people that are going to do those interviews who have the most subject matter expertise on those areas so that we can assure that the data getting into the system is accurate and reliable as possible. the work around that has really cemented the fact that we have actually really accurate data, but it really is all about constant training and process review and monitoring.
All right, so the next question I have is, I have in advance, thank you for sharing the data quality template from the HMIS. And the question is that what Michigan used to develop their data quality plan, or did you develop it independently?
We developed it independently, but obviously what we did is we pulled from the HUD resources. So when we go ahead and develop that, we look at what HUD is outlining, what HUD recommendations are, what HUD is really asking for. And those are all things that we make sure we address in our data quality plan. We obviously have a little bit more stringent requirements because of a couple things we do. Number one, our privacy rule and how we handle client information is more stringent. It's actually based on HIPAA as opposed to the HUD standardized rule. So that's an area where we went a little bit more stringent. But for the most part, we make sure that we adapt to whatever HUD's asking for, and where we need to be more stringent, we just adapt in those areas appropriately.
Okay. Perfect. Another question, do your programs contract with private providers to provide services? And if so, do your contracts with them spell out requirements for data collection?
Absolutely. So this is quite common. Absolutely. We have a lot of private agencies that do that. And one of the things that we actually have, and this has been a very positive thing, is we work with the funders to actually write in some of those requirements into their contracts with the agency. So that becomes part of the contracts, and the monitoring part of the process becomes part of the contracts. And the fortunate thing, and this is really a huge thing, we have seen where we have, if you will, those contractors that, or the statewide funders, where you see the best data quality and you see the best results of the program is actually when those funders jump in and they become fully invested within the data process as far as monitoring that and being on top of it. For instance, and just an example, our Department of Health and Human Services in Michigan here ran a bunch of the emergency shelter funding for the state. We had their staff were very involved within the monitoring aspect of it in a positive way, and it led to some very positive outcomes out of those programs that were funded through those streams because they were very active and very invested in the service delivery of those programs.
Excellent. Elan, do we have anyone on the phone?
I'm showing no questions at this time.
Okay. I still have more, though, so Mike and Gerry are not quite off the hook yet. This is a two-part question. Part one, how do you incent, engage, and enlist business users to help in developing the business rules for validating data entry?
I was going to say, let Mike handle it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Elizabeth, can you?
Sure.
Yeah, can you repeat that question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it's how do you incent, engage, and enlist business users or end users to help in developing the business rules for validating data entry?
Right. Yeah. So in a lot of communities, their HMIS systems are driven by their HMIS leads, but they're also driven by the establishment of data evaluation committees. They're driven by the establishment of user committees and user subcommittees, so that the users of the system, the users of the data, are given a voice in how the policies and procedures and standards are developed as well. So I think in places where we're seeing users, interact and have a voice in how these standards are developed, it's the continued culture in establishing that culture of consistently getting that level of input. So I think in some communities that just try to use data quality as a way to bring in their end users, they're typically not that successful. When we see communities establish, an outlet for users to come and discuss their privacy and data sharing policies, their data quality policies, their training sessions, et cetera, when they're really given a voice in the overall development of the programs, then we see, a lot stronger of a buy-in from the user perspective.
Okay. Wonderful. So we are right at time. I do have a couple more interesting questions. Do the two of you have just a few more minutes to spend with us?
This is Mike. I have plenty of time. I can't, Gerry. I don't know.
I'm free, so feel free as long as you need to. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, I'll just a little bit longer. And for our attendees who may need to sign off, we have been recording the webinar, and we'll post it on the DSS website. So if you do have to sign off before we finish, look for the recording with the remaining Q&A. So the next question we have is, what are you doing to make sure that you're also helping meet the data quality requirements for agencies other than HUD, such as SSVF, Runaway and Homeless Youth, and the SAMHSA PATH program?
Good question. Absolutely. Well, one of the things about this, actually, let Mike talk a little bit about this, because we call those federal partner funding sources, and they're actually written into it. So, Mike, you want to talk about that a little from an overall perspective, and then I can talk about it from a local and statewide perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gerry. So the biggest step that we've been able to take in the direction of making sure that all major federal partners are informed and receive what they ultimately need out of the HMIS system was really about 2 years ago. HUD and the federal partners released new data standards that more clearly met the needs of all the federal partners that were requiring participation. So when the new standards came out, there's the universal data elements, and then there are data elements that are specifically collected for HUD programs, for the PATH program, for the VA programs, et cetera. So it moved from a system that some federal partners were forcing their programs into benefiting from, to being a system that directly collected the information that was most valuable and most usable by those federal partners. So the first step was ensuring that the systems were collecting the right data for all partners involved. And then the follow-up to that was working with communities to redefine their data quality standards or their data quality monitoring process, and really their data collection process to meet the needs of those programs as well. So Gerry mentioned, and we previously mentioned the PATH program. So the SAMHSA PATH program is an on-the-ground, in-the-weeds program that serves the most vulnerable street populations in a community. The standards that existed prior to 2014 standards and bringing PATH online were a little bit loose in their ability to collect street outreach data. With the new data elements in place, more increased participation from federal partners, and then working with HMIS leads to redefine the way data was collected, and the quality of that data was monitored, started to speak more directly to the needs of the federal partners. Gerry, if you want to, highlight specifically how you guys approach it in Michigan.
Absolutely. So one of the things I want to say, first of all, is we, even before the federal partners began to come together and collaborate on this, we've actually had investment from all the various funding sources, including Runaway Homeless Youth, the veterans programs like SSDF, PATH, and HOPWA on our system, the SAMHSA programs for quite some time. One of the things that I do is within our staff, we have what I would call subject matter experts within each of our staff members who focus specifically on the guidelines of each of these programs and work very closely to give them guidance and support within their area of work. We also, for quite some time, have had reports in the system that support each of the federal partner funding sources. And each of our subject matter experts actually works to develop custom reports to assist some of these programs in areas that they have to monitor data quality that may be outside of the vendor specified reports, and to really work with them to come up with improved processes and procedures to do that. Again, I've got an expert in VA programs. My staff member who works with Runaway and Homeless Youth was actually a Runaway and Homeless Youth case manager for many years before joining our staff. We have a private contractor that works with both PATH and HOPWA. We spent considerable amount of time as a case manager in the Department of Health and Human Services. So we really have pulled from people who've been on the front lines or in supervision at some point to provide support around those areas.
Excellent. Okay. Ilan, do we have anybody on the phone?
I am showing no questions.
Okay, so I have many more in the chat, but I'm going to close with one final question, and then maybe what I can do is ask some of you all to respond to these via email, and we can share your answers with the listserv, so that we can go ahead and wrap up. It's kind of an open-ended question, though, and it's for both Mike and Gerry, and it's, can you give us a few examples of the benefit of data quality outside the system? For example, in areas like decision-making or in working with service providers.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Elizabeth. And I think that's a great question to end on, because I think Gerry said it best. You know, the data quality and data collection is really, you know, a small portion of what our communities are doing to really affect homelessness locally and house individuals and families in permanent housing as quickly as possible. So I think a lot of communities, now that they have fully functioning systems, they have data in their systems that they can rely on, you know, they're moving away from just using their data for the sake of data collection or even for the sake of reporting. And they're moving towards, you know, using their data to make very strategic decisions at the local level and how you know, how their resources, very valuable homeless resources, are being allocated. So we're seeing communities being able to use their systems and their data to, you know, in some cases defund the underperforming programs that they wouldn't have the ability or the data to defund in the past, or moving their funding towards new best practices or emerging program models that are really working in communities and affecting homelessness, you know, quicker and getting folks into permanent housing. So we're seeing communities use it from a strategic planning perspective, but we're also seeing communities use their HMIS systems as a tool to coordinating services. So you've heard both Gerry and I talk about coordinated entry systems, you know, and essentially that is developing a more consistent process for an individual or family to access homeless services in a community across all services available. As you can imagine, that's a pretty difficult process when you think about homeless services, but now that communities have databases, they have privacy and data sharing agreements in place, they're really able to, you know, have folks assessed at inconsistent ways, refer individuals and families to the most successful programs, you know, with the least impact as possible on those individuals or families. So we're really seeing this tool that was originally just data collection and just reporting, you know, be a way of, you know, strategically allocating resources and then better aligning and coordinating services within a community.
Fantastic.
And to build off Mike's answer, here's the thing, and I said this when I opened my section of the presentation up, but you have to create a culture that moves data completeness and data quality from the end goal as a means to the end goal. And then, again, if we look at the big mission of what within our world, within our sphere, we're all about using that data to drive decision-making, to invest in resources and strategies that prevent and end homelessness. So what I always tell communities when I go out there is you need to be looking at this data constantly, asking how this data is telling the story of what we're doing to prevent and end homelessness, what are some of the things that it is telling us as far as the challenges are that are going on, and how can we use this information to, again, advocate for continued work and support behind preventing and ending homelessness. I think one thing that happens really quickly is when agencies see that their data has a very tangible value and is actually bringing tangible benefit to the resources and the benefits they can offer to clients, that is where it's going to become very real. And to paint the picture from a very real, very practical perspective, we in Michigan have always been about using data for advocacy purposes. One of the things we do is we publish an annual report updating on the state of homelessness every year. As part of that report and as part of a whole data process last year, we were talking about creating an initiative to end veteran homelessness. We were actually this year, we got calls about a week before our governor's State of the State address. Our governor has said very specifically he wanted to put in an area on there to focus on ending veteran homelessness as a policy priority for him. He actually put that in, and we received funding for additional programs to work towards ending veteran homelessness. And the other thing that we're doing this next week, I'm actually flying out from Michigan to Washington, D.C. next week. We are actually meeting with an entire congressional delegation, both senators and representatives from the state of Michigan, with an entire team where we are taking HMIS data and actually showing the picture of the work that we're doing to advocate for continued movement around the area of homeless policy, to a congressional delegation from the state of Michigan. So this data actually does get put in front of decision makers, and it does have tangible impacts in what we're doing. And so I think that that's something you continuously have to do, is look for ways to make that information tangible, to bring benefits, to help the clients that we're here to serve.
Fantastic. Congratulations. That's a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful achievement.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank both of you. This has been really just an incredibly valuable webinar and content for our audience, and I know you put a lot into preparing the presentation and being with us today, so thank you both so much for participating with us today. And also thank you to our audience for being here with us today. Our next webinar will be in August, and it will be on modularity and system development. That invitation will be going out via the SACWIS Managers listserv within the next week or so, so be watching for it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, and this does conclude today's conference. You may disconnect at this time.